winner.
Hi guys, welcome back to the newest episode of the Pulse Line. Today's guest I'm so excited to have on. She is a professional soccer player and she's played in, I believe, 5 different countries: Finland, Puerto Rico, Canada, Brazil, and the United States. Most recently, she finished a stint with the Vancouver Whitecaps, but previous to that, she was playing at a club called Santos in Brazil. And for anyone who doesn't know, the history and really follow soccer, Santos is probably one of the biggest clubs in Brazil. So I'm sure she experienced loads of pressure, loads of intensity, and I'm sure she has a lot to offer in terms of the lessons she learned from her experiences. So I'm really excited to announce that our next guest is Jourdan Ziff. Hi, Jourdan. Thank you so much for coming on to the Pulse Line. I'm so excited to have you on and kind of just to share your story. Do you think you could maybe just start and tell us sort of your background, who you are, and what you've done?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Jourdan. I'm 27 years old and I'm living in California, and I was born and raised in California, and I'm a pro soccer player. So I started playing soccer when I was super little and actually did a few sports, but decided to kind of focus in on soccer and played Division One at Loyola University, Maryland on the East Coast, and kind of straight from there pursued professional. And played in Finland, Puerto Rico, Brazil, and then in Canada last year. So
Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm just going to start you off how we start every episode. I'm going to ask, what does pressure mean to you? And when have you maybe felt the most pressure or stress in your career?
Yeah. For me, pressure, I feel like there's really 2 sides of pressure. There's external pressures and internal pressures. And for me personally, I would say internal pressures are a little bit more difficult for me to recognize and cope with, because they feel stronger. And I would say, one of the most intense moments of pressure that I've experienced was probably when I was playing in Brazil in 2023, and really kind of my first field moments in Brazil, my first field moments in training, and then my first field moments in a game. And that kind of comes from, I think, being so out of my comfort zone and then performing in a place with an unknown language and an unknown style of play to me at the time, in front of a very, very intense fan base.
Absolutely. And you bring up such a good point, and I really do want to touch on Brazil and kind of the intensity and sort of pressure that you probably, and obviously you've just confirmed that you felt kind of in this environment. But you touched on a really important point too that I think is really important to obviously sort of highlight, is the fact that there's so many different kinds of pressure. Like you mentioned, an internal pressure, and obviously maybe when you were at Santos it was more sort of external because of all the different reasons. So for you as an athlete and obviously as a professional, how do you sort of manage these different types of pressures? Do you have different ways that you sort of manage these varieties of pressures, or is it sort of just kind of within you and your own mindset that you're able to deal with it?
Yeah, I think that you're so right. In different environments, I've experienced different kinds of pressure. I'm someone that I think holds expectations for myself pretty high. And so dealing with those internal pressures have been something that I've always worked on. And something that really helps me is always coming back to what is actually in my control. And phrasing things like that and thinking about things like that puts it in your own hands and takes a little bit of the unknown elements out of it. And then you're kind of always doing everything you can do, and you know it. And so then that internal pressure is a little bit more alleviated. So yeah, I would say really focusing and being in tune with what can I actually control in whichever environment you're in.
And so, guys, Jourdan's just touched on a really important point, and it's a phrase that I feel like we've heard time and time again with, the different people we've had on, is control the controllables. Because if you are sort of, in this situation where all these different sorts of pressures and stress are sort of just like raining down on you, and you can't really pinpoint, what you can do and what you can't do, it's really, really overwhelming. So Jourdan's really just highlighted the importance of figuring out exactly what's in your control and just focusing on those, because everything else is obviously out of your control. And if you can kind of manage this, then obviously certain stress, certain pressure becomes a lot more manageable. Would you agree?
Yes, completely agree.
Okay, amazing. Okay, so let's just backtrack. Sort of talk me through how you started playing soccer. Like, did you play locally in California, and sort of how you ended up on this track to where you ended up in Maryland?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest elements of my youth career was my decision to stay local.
Okay.
So that was I grew up in Temecula, California, so it's in Southern California. I decided to play within Temecula, and there were some big pros and big cons to that decision. And I knew that when I was making those decisions throughout the years. But, and some of that was I'm not traveling 2 hours to the biggest club in California. But I think it really laid a foundation for me of what was my experience with the sport and how I loved the sport.
Mm,
Because I did it because I loved the people it was bringing me and keeping in my life. It introduced me to some amazing coaches that are still in my life today and still some of my best friends. So that decision really laid a foundation of me falling in love with the sport.
amazing. And when you were sort of, this age, sorry, what age do you sort of play like in Temecula?
Yeah. So I started when I was like 5 years old
Okay.
and then played in Temecula up until I left for college at 17.
Wow. Okay. So sort of when you were, growing up, I guess, in Temecula and playing local, did you process like the pros and sort of cons of playing locally, or was it kind of just you were enjoying the game at this time?
I think I was very naturally following what I was loving doing.
Mm,
And I think I I knew there was some decision in that not to go off and play for these clubs that were being really recruited at an earlier age. But I think that it was pretty natural for me to just kind of follow that love.
mhm.
And I think that that was a theme throughout my career, was to kind of stay in tune with what my real passion was and to make sure that's what I was doing.
Right. And how would you say that sort of like your upbringing and like family life affected sort of how
Mhm.
you saw, I guess, all of this kind of unraveling in
Yeah.
front of you?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've been very close with my parents, and they were able to kind of provide a healthy balance of a high set of expectations, but
Mhm.
also with us choosing what we wanted to do and go after. And so that kind of healthy amount of pressure with that freedom was really motivating uh, to kind of follow and then stick with what we decided.
Amazing. And
Mhm.
so, okay, so sort of describe then how everything kind of shifted because you obviously played local for
Yeah.
a huge chunk of your life, and that was really important to you. And then all of a sudden, you've gone to Maryland, which is, for anyone who
Yeah.
doesn't know, is the other side of America to go and play. So, sort of, how did this come about? Like, what were you feeling? How did you make this decision?
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. I decided to stay local and do that. And then I could not have gone further for
Yeah.
college. I went from coast to coast. And that came because I was scouted by the college, Loyola, at a tournament in California. And other than that, I was looking at California schools. I
Hmm.
was even applying to schools that I just wanted to, that I could see myself at. And then I was going to try to walk on to their programs.
Right.
But I think that distance being the only factor, because I had visited Loyola and they had phenomenal facilities and a great program, a great education. I was like, I don't want to do it just based off of the distance. I think
Mhm.
this one is worth it. And I think my foundation was laid for what I loved already. And so I decided to take that risk. And I'm very glad I did because I think that helped me know that I could take those further distance risks later on in my career.
No, absolutely. But I'm sure, like, at the time, the decision was probably the biggest one that you'd made up to this point. And I'm sure there were some nerves and everything. So, how did you kind of manage this? And sort of maybe what did you sort of tell yourself as you're going through
Mhm.
this process to kind of ease those nerves?
Yeah, I agree. I think at that time that felt like the biggest decision of my life. And because I loved the sport so much, I made the decision. And I remember kind of like 2 weeks before it was time to leave to college, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I'm leaving everyone I know and everyone
Yeah.
I love, a state I love, and weather I'm unfamiliar with, and all these things. And so I think I just decided I'm going to roll with the punches.
Okay.
I knew I would have family that would come visit. I knew I wanted to see what else was out there.
Hmm.
But I would say at that age, I wasn't yet sure how to cope with the unknown. Whereas now, I really find so much opportunity in the unknown and being outside your comfort zone that that's how I would look at it now. I think back then I didn't know that lesson, but I think it was in there somewhere that, that's what I was motivated to do.
Absolutely. And obviously like the unknown is a huge part that like I think everyone sort of deals with, whether you're regardless of sort of what profession you're in, it's something that everyone sort of sees and maybe shies away from. So at least to me it seems like you've always kind of had this like internal sort of drive and I guess a bit of like bravery to kind of go and pursue what you love, right? But what advice would you give someone who maybe has a decision like this in front of them and can't sort of I guess find it within themselves to go for it?
Yeah, I would say it's something big, and it was something that I discovered through my those nerves and all these situations that I was like, right before you're like, what have I done? What have I signed myself up for? What did I agree to? And I think I've learned that once I just do it, I I've grown, or it has been a phenomenal opportunity. And so now I see the theme in those feelings that feel so negative, they're
Hmm.
actually such opportunity. And so my advice would be find kind of like make peace a little bit with those feelings. They suck, but there's opportunity there. Like that can be a good sign. So it's a little bit reframing that mindset a little bit. Like, this could be a good sign. Doesn't
Yeah.
feel great, but something good or, a lot of growth is about to happen.
No, absolutely. And I could totally relate to that because I've told the story, a bit before, but uh, when I first signed like my first professional contract, me and my partner were actually living together in Brighton, and the opportunity happened within like 4 days. And we had to turn like everything around. And obviously, before we kind of decided, I was on the fence and kind of feeling exactly what you're saying, like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Like, should I do it? Like, do you know what I mean? And it was such an
Right.
internal struggle. But I think you're absolutely right in saying that those feelings and those kind of nerves, while they felt really negative, it was the best decision that I could have ever
Yeah.
made to go and do it.
Yeah.
So I would 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, Jordan. So you finished up or you started at Maryland. Sort of when did you decide that you were going to try and play professionally and when did it sort of become reality?
Yeah. Um, well, in my collegiate career, during my junior year, I had a potentially career-ending injury. I ruptured my midfoot and wasn't exactly sure. Doctors weren't exactly sure how you return to the sport after that. It happens
Wow.
sometimes in American football with linemen,
Sure.
that injury. And so I had 9 months of a recovery process, and I was not able to redshirt because it happened in the game that made me ineligible to redshirt and have an extra year of college.
Yeah.
So, you know, because that happened in such a vital year of your college career, um, I maintained, I don't know, I was really present in the moment and just really focused on my recovery and then really tuning into my senior year and what I wanted that to be. And so I was super focused just on college at that point, even in my first semester senior year when I was playing. And then when that season ended, I think because I didn't wasn't able to get that red shirt, I felt like there was more I still had to prove, even to myself in the sport.
Right.
Like I could go further. I missed a year, so where am I going to take that year? And I think also in combination, I had a phenomenal coach, Kevin Dempsey at Loyola, and he had so much belief and offered me a lot of guidance
Hmm.
on potentially how you could go pro and some opportunities. And so it wasn't until that second semester senior year, which is pretty last minute because you're about to be out in the world, that I knew I wanted to go further. And so the day I graduated was the day I flew to Finland.
That's a crazy story. And obviously, I actually had no idea that you had kind of this like long-term injury that you were facing. So your your journey obviously is like loads of ups and downs, which I think is really important sort of for everyone to understand because like everyone that we've had on, it's never sort of been like a straightforward kind of, gone through this, gone to this, and then it's always been, ups and downs. So I think hopefully you can kind of resonate with that. But then, so this injury, right? When you sort of got this news and you sort of saw the timeline, did you sort of feel like that may be it?
You know, I think, especially when you hear this could be a career-ending injury. I mean, even I remember in my PT coming back, I had to like retrain my brain to kick a ball. Like I wasn't going to kick the ground, which is a crazy thing for a player playing Division One who's been playing since they were 5 years old. Be like, how do I not kick the ground?
Mm-hmm.
But there was something that I didn't have a hesitation. I knew I was going to be back playing. I guess I didn't know what it would look like, but I almost didn't. I did not even question that I would be back on the fields. So I don't know where that came from, but I didn't really ever succumb to the fact that, well, I'm finished.
Yeah. No, obviously, like that's sort of amazing, and to have that kind of voice inside you is really special. But another thing you said that I found really interesting is Jourdan, you and I actually have really similar stories because I went to a small Division 3, right? And for me, sort of playing professionally was never became a reality until my junior year, where I sat down with my coach, and he, like was one of the most important sort of mentors for me. He had also played professionally, and he was kind of like, Danny, like I don't know if you want to, but I think you can play professionally if you want to.
Yeah.
And obviously, no one had ever told me that, like up to that point, so I'd never sort of considered it even to be
Yeah.
like in the realm of what I could do. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, like fine, like I'll just try, like worst case doesn't work out.
Yeah.
But for me, like that conversation sort of changed my whole life, right? And then for
Right.
you, obviously, you've taken this sort of risk. You've left California, you've gone to Maryland, and now you sort of had this role model, this mentor of a coach. How
Mhm.
important would you say that sort of his presence was to you? And for anyone who like maybe doesn't have like this sort of figure in their life, how would you kind of guide them in terms of like
Yeah.
giving themselves that self belief?
Yeah, I mean that is a phenomenal point, and I agree. I think that is very similar what we went through because kind of on the women's side, we didn't have a lot of, oh, we're seeing all these people go pro. So
Yeah.
it's also not in our minds, oh, like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to go professional. And a lot of female players don't think like that. I do think it's changing, which is amazing, but even when I was in college, that's just not something that you saw role modeled to you. So you just aren't aware that it's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so then to have someone be like, no, there is a step to get there, or
Mm-hmm.
that you can do it, it just opens your eyes to be like, oh, like, I knew I loved to play. I knew I could handle it, but you don't think that it's actually within your reach to do it.
Yeah.
And so it was a huge piece, and I'm still really close to him, and he knows the hand he's played in my career up to this point. But I would also say, if you're someone that doesn't have someone like that with you, that to there's so many outlets now, and I mean, just the conversations you're having, that everyone's paths and everyone's stories look different,
Mm-hmm.
and to remain really introspective and self-reflective on what do you want, because for some people maybe they can see, oh, I could go pro, but maybe it's also not what they really want. And so I think having a lot of that self-reflection is a really important piece. And then to always not put everything on one opinion or one outward person.
Absolutely.
It's to talk to different people then, and then to check back in with yourself, and then talk to someone else, and then check back into yourself. That way you're not kind of putting that in the hands of someone else. It puts a little bit more back in your control.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. And guys, Jourdan again has said something that I think is really important. It's kind of that like you are sort of the author of like your own story, and obviously while it's really important to like speak with the people who are close around you and sort of hear their thoughts, and maybe that changes the way you think, ultimately it's sort of your decision. So if there's something that you want to do and like you feel it in your heart, you just got to go for it. And it doesn't really matter like the outside noise, what everyone else is saying, because ultimately it's sort of your life, it's your journey, it's your path, and you're the one who has to make these kind of decisions. So you finish up at Maryland, and then you said you went to Finland, or you go to Finland. How did this kind of come up? Like, obviously that's a big change too, because like it's like you're moving further and further like east, obviously.
Yeah.
Finland could not be any different than California, like to be honest.
Yep.
So
No, that is so true. Yeah, I think part of me knew I can't go back to California before making this jump
right.
because who knows, if I go home, uh, if I'll do it, if I'll make the jump again. And it was something that I wanted to travel. I wanted to play. And so I wasn't afraid of where that place was, how different it was. I just knew I wanted to see more. And so it was the very first time I had really lived outside of the country, and Finland was, I knew, going to be different. And you don't really know until you're there in what ways. But I was so happy I did it and that it was such a different environment. And it was my first look into European soccer and, these such diversity within such a small place, being Europe and having so many different countries there. So, um, yeah, it was just my first look into that.
That's amazing. And did you have like success there? Like, did you feel sort of where you went was like a good platform for you in terms of like development, in terms of sort of exposure?
Yeah, I did feel like I found success in Finland, and you know these different stages to me, I feel like success has always looked different. Um, Finland was a little bit more of that classic version of success because we ended up at the top of the league and won a championship. Um, but I think that at that stage that was really important to me, and just an important step, being my first experience, and it was awesome that it worked out that way. And I think my first experience with a different style of play, because up until that point I had been around American soccer my whole life,
Hmm.
and that is different. And I have learned, although the game is the game and that's beautiful and it connects you with every place in the world, there are very different styles,
Hmm.
and I liked learning a new one.
No, that's amazing. And then, so obviously, like you're in this new environment. I don't think, do people in Finland, do they speak English?
They teach or they teach English in schools, so there was some English, but I even had a coaching shift in the middle of the season,
Okay.
and I went from a coach that spoke English to a coach that spoke no English. So it was really kind of half and half.
Okay. So when you went to Finland, obviously I'm sure you kind of had some kind of like expectation. Was it everything that you expected, or were there like differences in terms of, how it all
Yeah.
played out?
I would say because it was my first season abroad and professionally, that I almost didn't know even what to have expectations of.
Right.
So I went in with such an open mind that in that way I couldn't not meet expectations because
Mm,
I went in with such an open mind. And I would say that that was helpful and might be helpful to people even thinking about it, is to just have your first experience with such an open mind, because professional football looks so different in every single experience and in every single place that I think you're not giving yourself a fair shot at loving it and a good experience if you put expectations, especially on the first one.
right. No, that's so important, and obviously that's super applicable, kind of, I think, to everything, and especially if it's like the first, I guess, job that you've had, or like
Right.
first, I don't know if you're a musician, maybe it's like the first sort of song you've put out or whatever, like sort of not having expectations for the
Yeah.
first one. I think, like you said, allows
Right.
you kind of to grow and to develop and to
Yep.
appreciate. I think kind of where you are, maybe more than
Yeah.
if you had sort of gone in with these big
Yeah.
expectations. So.
Yeah, definitely. And keeps your mind open,
Absolutely.
and probably a little more positive. So,
Amazing. Okay, so you play, was it just a season? You play a season in Finland and then in Puerto
yeah.
Rico?
Yeah. So I went from Finland, a little bit of a COVID gap in there,
Okay. Right.
and then went to Puerto Rico, and I played 2 seasons in Puerto Rico, but I was there a total of a year.
Okay, and how did that sort of just all happen?
Yeah, so I think, especially during COVID, I had another moment to pause and slow down, and that kind of forced upon me. Everything was taken away from everyone, and then we were given this kind of unique opportunity of what do we want to add back in, or what do we want to let go, or go back to, and I felt truly like I wasn't finished
Hmm.
and was connected to the coach in Puerto Rico. And again, it looked really different because I feel like in Finland, I was experiencing how big of a world football and soccer is out there.
Hmm.
And in Puerto Rico, I lived on an island and
Right.
to really look inward and be like, all right, now what do I need to do to get to where I want to go and develop myself more? And I was on a great team to do it. We were trained very hard, but achieved a good amount of success there too.
Amazing. Yeah. It's actually really funny, Jordan, because again, like there's so many similarities that you and I have with our journeys. And for you, it was your injury, but for me, it actually was COVID because my senior year of college got taken away from
Right.
COVID. And it was like the same thing that you said. Like, I felt like, oh, I've done all this training up to this point. Like, I felt like I was going to have a really good year. And I was like, I'm not done. Like, there's no way I'm going to end it like this. So I have to
Yeah.
try and like go and go do something else. So I just think that's really interesting. But
Yeah.
then obviously, okay, so obviously, you've gone to Finland, and at least in my head, I would think like, the next sort of logical step would be to sort of stay in Europe and kind of try and progress your career in Europe, right?
Hmm.
Obviously, you've gone to Puerto Rico and you've had a lot of success there. Was that like a tough decision for you to go and leave?
To leave Puerto Rico
To
or
leave Finland to go to Puerto Rico
yeah.
completely.
I think again, I think sometimes there's things out of our control, and a little bit of that was COVID, which had me go all the way back home.
Hmm.
And so I really wasn't in a position to be in Finland and then just stay there or just jump, to the next country in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think it excited me to go and experience a very different environment more culturally,
Mm.
some almost like in a travel sense. And so it wouldn't be truthful if I said it was just based off of soccer. Because at that point I was like, this is an opportunity for me to grow in different ways as well. And I think I've always looked at my sport like that because it's given me so much in that capacity. So I think that part of my decision was that, where it was like, wow, I can go to this place that is just a culture, more of like a Hispanic or Latino culture
Mm.
that I haven't really experienced yet. And so I think that was a big motivating factor.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And before we continue on like your career and everything like that, I just want to ask real quick, because how would you kind of describe yourself as a person and like your personality and everything?
Yeah. Um, well, I feel like I really wish my friends could answer this question for me.
Yeah, of course.
Hard to just sum up yourself.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say, I think because I found so much joy and adventure and spontaneity, I would say that that really bleeds into my personality.
Mm.
And so I would say I have a pretty big mix of like lightheartedness and adventure and love for just laughing and being in communities with kind of a love for connection and deep conversations.
Hmm.
So um, I would say a bit of a blend between those and kind of a competitor at the same time,
Yeah.
driven. So a little bit of a blend of a few kind of spectrums.
No, absolutely. I only ask, right? Because like I would totally agree, and obviously we haven't really known each other for too terribly long, but from like
Hmm.
the interactions that we have had, I would 100% agree. Like you seem someone who's like I said quietly intense, like
Oh, cool. Yeah.
but also really like spontaneous. And I just think it's funny because I think you have a really sort of skill of being able to wait for the right opportunity and be comfortable sort of in these periods of like limbo because you're so steadfast and so like sure of who you are and what you want as a
Hmm.
person and a player. And I think, from the conversation that we've had, you've actually helped me quite a bit when I've been making sort of, I think the big decision was either to go back to Vietnam or to sort of stay and wait to try and play in the US. And for anyone who doesn't know, I actually had, when I finished my season in Vietnam, I had an offer to go back. I had like a full contract, full everything, whatever. And then I also the opportunity to go and coach at a school and sort of wait to try and play in the U.S. And I ended up passing up the opportunity to play in Vietnam and coached. And while it didn't really sort of work out to play in the U.S. at the minute, I actually got a lot closer in the sense of like building connections, like finding a good agent and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Great.
it all comes back to this question. It's like, you're very like spontaneous, but you're also willing to wait for the right opportunity.
Mhm.
Like, what advice would you give to someone in terms of like being patient, and how important is it to like wait for that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up such a good point because it's it's great to hear you say that because that's been such a struggle, but a mountain that I have had to climb with wanting so much structure in my life, to
Mm,
being someone that is detail oriented or wants a plan, and then to choose a life path that is absolutely none of that has forced me to really work on
yeah.
those. And again, kind of that self reflection of, okay, this is the kind of person I am, and then this is my circumstances and how can I make it work. And something that I would say for people that are like that or in especially transition periods and is kind of being really relentless to tune out noise
Mm,
and kind of get more in tune with what's in your best interest. And that noise can kind of look like your fears of the unknown or outward societal pressures or your own ego at times. And kind of a lot of that self-reflection will help you be like, you know what, that is noise and that's not actually what's best for me right now. And you bring up your huge decision, and it's difficult to know in those moments, but when you are like, you know what's actually best for me, and you're the one that's going to have to then live in the predicament that you put yourself in, um, it's really vital to come back and kind of know, all right, I can seize unique opportunities and be spontaneous, but I can also slow down and reevaluate. Maybe this isn't my best next step, and maybe slowing down will teach me more than going away.
mhm.
But
No, that's wow. Yeah, that's yeah. That's just amazing. But what it made me think of actually, like as you were speaking, was this video that actually my partner, like Josie, she showed me, and it was I can't remember who it was, but it was this woman, and she was kind of saying like there's no such thing as a bad decision. Like once you make a decision, it's up to you, and it's your choice to make it a good one, if that makes
yeah, I love that. I completely agree with that. It's a very good piece of advice.
So I have another question now because obviously from our whole conversation, you seem like someone who really prioritizes sort of your life in general, like your mental health and just overall
Mm.
happiness above really anything else. But obviously, like you said, you've chosen a career and you've pursued a career where like the stability and sort of like the location might not necessarily be up to you, and a lot of that affects sort of
Yeah.
your happiness and mental health. So how hard is it for you to kind of balance those two things?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that is, I feel like a key. Mastering that, I feel like gives you so much
Hmm.
and helps you so much. So I think it's ongoing. I think being open-minded and always being a person that's willing to learn helps with that because I don't think it's something that you can necessarily master because it always looks different.
Hmm.
A sacrifice right now will look different than a sacrifice when I'm in season and away. Um, right, you know, when you are away, you are sacrificing a lot. When you're in a season, sometimes it's physically sacrificing
Yeah.
yourself. Sometimes it's sacrificing, you know, the events of your loved ones back home.
Hmm.
Um, but and if that those are things that also bring you happiness and add positively to your mental health, then you have to do things that feed those as well, so you're not as one-sided and then drowning where you are. And I think it goes back to kind of that foundation that when I was so young is I fell in love with the game
Hmm.
and I fell in love with the opportunities it brought me. And that reminder gets me through the harder times when I'm in a season, to say, well, you know, I'm doing this also because I love it. And so these sacrifices are worth it.
Hmm.
But it doesn't always make it easy. But yeah.
No, absolutely not. But no, obviously, that's those are such good points that you kind of raise, and the obviously the importance again of loving what you do, I think is
Mhm.
is really
Yeah.
profound. Okay, guys, first of all, for any confusion, basically we're having a little bit of trouble with the sound quality and my microphone picking up the like external noise coming from my speaker. So I've just whacked these on hopefully to alleviate all of that. But okay, Jordan, we're back. So you finished up 2 seasons with your club in Puerto Rico. Obviously, you must have enjoyed it because you stuck around for a second season. But then Santos comes up next, correct?
Yeah, yeah, pretty
Okay.
much directly after Puerto Rico. I had a couple months of an off season, and then I went all the way down to South America and started with Santos.
Amazing. And for anyone who doesn't kind of follow soccer or know, I guess, the history of the club and what it means in Brazil, Santos is probably one of the biggest clubs historically in Brazil. And Brazil is like this, like, it's a mecca of soccer base. It's very similar to England in the sense of, it's incredibly saturated. Everybody wants to be a professional soccer player. The games are crazy, rivalries, sometimes even like violence and stuff, which obviously we don't condone, but it just speaks to the intensity and sort of the love and passion that's, in this country for soccer. So Jordan, obviously you're going to this huge club and obviously it's the biggest one, I would say, in terms of your career. Did you feel like this, like an increase of pressure, an increase of expectations in terms of like what you had to do?
Yeah, I definitely knew. I mean, it was a part of my career that I was the most nervous for because, again, that complete unknown and knowing the level I was going to have to play at, and then the intensity of the environment I was going to have to play in. So it was those two sides of kind of that external and internal pressure coming to a head. And um, and I definitely had a drive to do it though because of my Brazilian family who wasn't living down there, but definitely gave me that extra motivation that I really wanted to go and explore that side of my own heritage and learn the language and kind of do the best I could when I went down there.
Amazing. And you were also playing, I believe, with you mentioned Christian, who's
Yes.
like, okay.
Yeah. That, I mean, was a whole other element that definitely added
Hmm.
to the nerves because Cristiane Rosetta was someone who's been around the Brazilian national team for a few decades. And I watched her in some of her World Cup matches back when I was in Europe. And I am a central forward. And when I was going down there, I was going to play as that attacker. And I was going to be playing right next to her. So that was a bit intimidating.
No, absolutely. But the experience, I'm sure, was like amazing. Like, were you able to learn things off her, and was she like a good sort of person to speak to in terms of, helping you grow?
Yes, she definitely was. And I would say there were so many people there that although they didn't know exactly what it meant to be a foreigner within Brazil, they knew the intensity of the environment and my desire to just learn and be a part of it. And so a few people were so receptive to me. And although we couldn't even speak the same language because down there is no English, um, they make you feel like they're working with you and they believe in you. So that helps.
No, honestly, I can totally resonate with that because obviously I played a season in Vietnam and the league that I played in, there was no foreigners. So it was all Vietnamese players with one slot for a Vietnamese player,
Oh,
like person who's born in Vietnam but grew up overseas, which are called the Viet Q. So I was the Viet
uh,
Q, but it
yeah.
was the same thing as you. Like I couldn't speak, I don't speak any Vietnamese, so I couldn't communicate with half the people on my team, but there were like a select few that like you said really make you feel welcome and we'd be
Hmm.
communicating with like Google Translate back and forth, but
Oh my God. Yeah.
it is, but those bonds, like it's hard to explain, but it means like so much kind of when you're there.
Oh, totally. I mean, all you have is the energy of the other person to connect with. And so the people that you do connect with, it's strong and it means a lot when you are so out of your element.
Absolutely. Okay, so with Santos, the obviously the pressure is it's probably
Mhm.
enormous because like again, it's one of the biggest clubs in Brazil. It's the fan base is incredibly intense, like incredibly loyal. So when you get there, did you kind of have these goals and expectations for yourself? Did you feel like other people had goals and expectations for you? And how did you kind of manage this?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I really was motivated to prove to myself that I deserved to be there and that I could perform. And I would say that managing and learning in the process of what that kind of intense fan base and that intense environment was going to be like, um, I knew was going to be difficult. And people had expectations on me before I even stepped on the field because you're announced to the world of Santos fans, this is our new attacker. And people they want to love you. The fan base wants to love you, but it is not guaranteed because
Yeah.
you're wearing their shirt. I almost said camisa, in the other language. You're wearing their jersey, and they want anyone who wears that to honor it and to perform well in it. So, and I saw, I mean, even before I stepped on the field there, riots in the streets from Santos fans about the club of Santos. And I was like, wow, this is going to be different. And so I kind of just had to really maintain my own self belief because I wasn't going to get any sort of external validation without having the language, without being super familiar with the Brazilian style of play yet. And I really had to kind of maintain positivity within myself in order to give me the best chance at performing well.
And did the fans love you?
And I did ended up connecting really well with the fans, and I would say that is a version of my success that I felt down there was that it's such a huge part of it. If you can win them over, if they are on your side, it feels really good. But I had to be careful not to lay too much on that because again, it's out of your control. So, but it was amazing because, I'm still a huge fan of that club and I love the fan base. So I hope it was mutual, but I felt like it was.
Amazing. And so you play a season with Santos, and then you leave. Were you disappointed that you didn't go back, or did you feel like you had more to prove at Santos, or were you happy kind of to move on?
Yeah, I would say that that was a very huge decision.
Hmm.
The year as a whole was extremely intense, and I loved it. I mean, I learned the Portuguese language. I connected with my own culture. I got my own Brazilian citizenship officialized down there.
Amazing.
I played with one of my idols. There were so many amazing things that came out of it. But I think going back to even our earlier conversation, sometimes just even achieving success and making your decision based off of that was a little bit of the noise I had to sort through in order to make my next decision. And I think maintaining that mental side of things, that love for the game, I knew I wanted to slow down and check in before I jumped into another contract,
Hmm.
living on the other side of the world, in such a different place.
Amazing. And so, okay, so from Santos, obviously the whole opportunity with the Whitecaps kind of comes up.
Mhm.
At this point, though, I had a question. Like, was there any other options sort of on the table for you besides the Whitecaps, or was that kind of like the only sort of thing that popped up after?
No, that was an interesting time because there were a few different things I could have done, and the Whitecaps opportunity, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit, was extremely unique, and
Hmm.
so I didn't know at that point how far away I wanted to live, if I wanted to start kind of connecting back a little bit closer to the community I grew up in,
Hmm.
and um, and there were some other opportunities to play in Europe or potentially go back down to Brazil. And I think I liked the uniqueness of the Whitecaps opportunity and Canada. I have a brother-in-law that's Canadian, and
Okay.
there was a few things that really drew me towards taking on that tournament with the Whitecaps.
But I'm sure this decision was probably very strange for you because you've just come out of Santos, which like it
Yeah.
feels like this like pressure cooker where, all
Yeah.
eyes are on you and, like
Mhm.
the intensity is, turned up to the max. But now you're going to an environment where, it's probably not like that because you're coming in with this vast load of experience comparative to the other players.
Right.
So in terms of like the expectations of what to expect, maybe it wasn't so big. So kind of was it
Yeah.
strange? Like, is that kind of how it felt for you, or kind of describe maybe the
Yeah.
environment when you got there?
I think, and I don't know if it's just a common way with how I think. I think that external pressure ends up weighing on me less than the internal ones.
Okay.
And so my own expectations were higher for myself going into Whitecaps.
Wow.
because I was bringing experience and I wanted to make the most of it. And so for me, my internal stakes were higher. Um,
Mm.
in Santos and in Brazil, there is so much pressure around you. I actually learned a little bit how to let go of that having a hold on me, because in Brazil, if that external pressure has a hold on you, it's not the right environment for you. It's too difficult to even succeed with putting having that all out there. So I had to go inward a lot. And so taking on this opportunity, I knew being a player of more experience on this team was going to be a challenge for me to sort through internally.
Absolutely. And obviously, like you mentioned, you're coming into the Whitecaps with this kind of
Hmm.
experience. And obviously now these like internal sort of expectations and goals for yourself. One, how did you sort of set those out for yourself? And then two, was this the first time in kind of your career where like you really felt, you know, all the eyes were like looking at you in terms of being like a leader?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I've been in very different roles on all sorts of different teams. I
Hmm.
was looked at on my college team. I ended up being in a leadership position, and that
Okay.
started my junior year, actually, when right before I got injured. So I was a junior captain on my team, and that came with its own set of challenges as I went through that kind of extreme injury. And so I think I had been tested in a little bit more of that leadership role in different
Mm.
parts of my journey. And so going into the Whitecaps, I knew that was going to be a part of it. Uh, but I think, I honestly think the camaraderie that I found in Vancouver, and especially with my teammates and, the ones I lived with and the ones I was connected to, we were able to share in that and have these conversations and be open about it, which allows you to give yourself more compassion at the same time for the difficulty in it. That it's not just an expectation that you should be living up to, that there's still difficulty in that, and that you're human, and that that's a different kind of challenge. So that camaraderie really helps with that.
And you spoke about difficulty just now, and I want to ask a question regarding that because obviously I watched the summer tournament. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Whitecaps and Jordan competed in it was like this CONCACAF Women's Champions Cup. So it was like all the best teams in North America and Central America, and her team was obviously part of that. But obviously, certain results don't go your way, and I'm not going to say any numbers or anything. But there were quite a few where maybe obviously it was hard to take. So as a leader and as someone who again like the team is kind of looking up to, what are some of the tricks and what are some of the tools that you use to like one keep the group together during these hard times, but then also provide like insight and sort of reflection and sort of push the team forwards after maybe when there's like a big setback.
Yeah, I think throughout my whole career, and specifically my professional one, playing in different places, we talked about success earlier. And I think I learned that success comes in very different forms. And the
Hmm.
hard one that, onlookers, you have just the classic one. Are you winning? Are
Hmm.
you at the top of your league? You know, that is success. And that is not always success. And I think that in Brazil, my team performed really well. But there were these other elements that I felt success in, which was challenging myself and growing in areas that were unfamiliar. And I felt just such positives from that. And so then when you're, yeah, these huge underdogs in this extremely high level tournament that we were in with the Whitecaps, um, we were the big underdogs. And so there were little successes that we could tune into along the way that allows you to disconnect from just one game's result. And there were things that we were doing that it was the first time had ever been done on the team
Hmm.
and in Canada. And those are that perspective that I think some of us as the older players were able to show some of the younger ones who were used to that kind of just initial classic version of success and winning, winning, winning.
Hmm.
I hope that we were able to bring that along with the coaching staff to say, but be proud of this. Look at what you did like this. Don't just look at one result. Even though sometimes that's hard to disconnect from, there is true success in other parts of the game.
No, absolutely. That's 100% accurate. But obviously, like it is tough because again, at the end of
Yeah,
the
it's a
day, like
big
soccer
part of the
and
game.
yeah, soccer and football is like a
Yep.
business, you know. It's like it's based
Yeah.
solely on results. But I think the way that you see the game and the way that you kind of go about it is amazing. So, okay,
Hmm.
Jordan, what's next? Because obviously, you know, you're 27. You've just
Hmm.
come off this sort of stint with the Whitecaps. Where's like the next thing? Like, where's your head
Yeah.
at? What are you thinking?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit of where my head at is right now is kind of this passion to be involved in this sports industry, and whether that's me on the field again or me kind of exploring more this deep curiosity I have about the world and about conversations, and tying those two together, I feel like is where I'm at right now. And I think this year it could entail that coupled with another professional experience, or it could be me diving into that different kind of side of the sports industry. So that's a little bit of where my head is at right now.
Is it nerve-wracking though? Because and do you feel like a sense of maybe sadness? Because obviously, like you're 27, and for most, I guess, athletes, that's arguably the prime of like your career. And up to this point, you know, you sacrificed so much. You've been away
Mhm.
from family and friends. Is it hard kind of letting go?
Yeah, I would say again, it's that constant battle to tune out noise and to tune in with yourself. So I would say that's a difficult process. And it doesn't matter how many times you've been through it or how much, one person looks like a master of it. It's still a very unknown time period. I think that because I have gone through it before, I know that there is opportunity in that, and I can have that bring me some peace in those periods. Um, and again, it's kind of self belief bleeds through, not just when you're in season, but kind of like, you know what, this timing is going to work out the way it's going to. And I can believe that I'm motivated enough and I'm driven enough that I will choose the right opportunity as it presents itself.
Amazing, Jordan. You've been honestly an amazing guest. Like I feel like I'm so close to literally just turning over the podcast to you and just saying, honestly, just take it. It's yours
Yeah.
because all the stuff you said. So I'm just gonna fire some questions at you just to end it off, and then obviously we'll just wrap it up from there. Sound
Okay,
good?
I'm ready.
Okay. What, in your opinion, is one key to having a healthy mindset?
I would say one key would be positive self-talk. I think it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you don't believe in yourself, then, it's one of the most important parts of the mindset.
Who is someone that you look up to?
My sister, she's a paramedic firefighter in Los Angeles. So there's just so much role model there, and we're extremely close. So for sure, her.
Wow, that's amazing. And how's she doing right now? Because obviously the wildfires and everything going on
Yeah.
in LA. Is she okay or how's she doing?
Yeah, she's good. She's good. I mean, it's a lot on first responders, but I
Hmm.
think that's part of the reason why she's my role model. I mean, she was built for it and she loves what she does. And so she's doing good.
Amazing. Okay. What is the hardest decision that you've made up to this point in your life?
I would say, even we touched on it in this podcast, I would say the decision to not return to Brazil in 2023 with an unclear path ahead. So it's not like I wasn't choosing it to choose something else was probably the hardest decision.
How important would you say it is to love what you do?
For me and my particular journey, I would say the most important. I would say it's vital because at the end of the day, you're sacrificing so much and you have to do it because you love what you're doing.
Amazing. And Jordan, you're 27, so let's just say in 8 years, you know, you'll be 35. What are
Mhm.
you doing in 8 years? Like, what does your life kind of look like to you?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's even where my head is at right now. It's being hands-on in the sports industry, but encouraging real conversations and a curiosity about the world and how important connection is within communities. So it's really being hands-on in the sports industry and bringing those pieces to it.
Okay. And if you could just leave us with like one piece of wisdom to sort of end it off, what would it be?
Yeah. I would say for me, I find so much truth and comfort in that in this saying that there is so much growth when you're out of your comfort zone. And so embracing feelings of nervousness and pressure and times when you're intimidated, because that's where real opportunities lie.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jourdan, for coming on the Pulse Line. You've been such an incredible guest, and you've given us so many sort of pieces to sort of reflect on. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's so important to have these kind of conversations in our sport. So I absolutely love what you're doing.
Guys, honestly, what an episode. I felt like almost every second I probably could have paused and, done like a takeaway from something Jourdan said. I think her mindset and, the way that she sees the world and sees her decisions is something that's really special. And hopefully you guys are able to take away, a lot of what she said. In terms of, some of the key takeaways that I felt, really resonated with me, I felt that, the way that Jourdan viewed success and seeing that success as a whole is something that's subjective. It's something that's really important for all of us kind of to understand. So as long as you are comfortable sort of with the achievements that you make, it doesn't really matter kind of what anyone else says. And there's no kind of metric to what success is. It could be something really small or it could be something really big. But as long as it feels good to you, that's kind of all that matters. So I think that's something really important kind of to take away, because it's really easy to see other people's accomplishments and then compare your own to that and then almost diminish kind of what you've done. So I think understanding that success is individual and subjective is again really important. And then I think Jourdan's also own perspective of kind of, being able to let go of certain pressure and almost kind of be one, I guess, kind of with herself and understand her own goals, her own motives, and exactly why she was there is something that, everyone can kind of learn from, because it's really, really easy to get in these situations where, you're listening to other people. And I think she mentioned calling it noise, listening to all this kind of noise around you and being distracted from exactly kind of what you want. So I think that's, again, like another really important lesson. And lastly, she said right from the beginning, being able to control the controllables and understand what's actually in your grasp to control is something that can help you. And obviously it's something that helps me let go of certain situations and also sort of manage these big kind of moments, because it allows me to just focus, and hopefully you kind of to just focus on what you can do as opposed to letting everything overwhelm you at once. So again, guys, there were so many things that, she could have said. Like, I'm going to ask her probably if she wants to just take over the podcast as a whole. But no, honestly, this episode was amazing. Jourdan's mindset is amazing. So I'm really glad that you were able to hear her stories and sort of what she had to say. But yeah, we'll have more guests on as always, and stay tuned to our social media on Instagram and TikTok to keep up with what's coming next. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next one.
Here's a shot far side. Danny Reed with the winner.